Let's be brutally honest. Stupidity isn't about low intelligence. It's about blindness to patterns, to pain, to the truth of one's own reflection. A foolish man doesn't see his own destruction. He repeats, avoids, and projects, then calls it fate. But the moment you stop blaming others, you begin to see the enemy within. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So, what if the stupidity you judge in others is simply a shadow you haven't yet met in yourself? Let's look in the mirror, together. The most dangerous kind of man is not the one who lacks knowledge, but the one who believes he already knows. He walks into every room certain, not curious, not open, just certain. And in that certainty, he builds a wall between himself and growth. He talks more than he listens. He argues to win, not to understand. He clings to his opinions as if letting them go would unravel his entire identity. You'll hear him often, confident in his judgment, firm in his ignorance. He mistakes loudness for strength and repetition for wisdom. But behind that mask of knowing is fear, a deep, ancient fear of being wrong, of being seen without armor, of having to admit, "I don't know." Because the moment he admits that, his illusion crumbles. So he defends it, with pride, with arrogance, with blind certainty. But certainty is not wisdom. It is a fortress built by the ego to protect itself from the unknown. Carl Jung understood this well. He wrote, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." And so, the foolish man does not think. He assumes. He does not explore. He declares. He does not question. He attacks the questioner. The wise man, in contrast, lives in doubt. Not the kind that weakens, but the kind that softens. He asks, he listens, he changes, because he knows that every truth is only as useful as your willingness to challenge it. The fool does not know this. He surrounds himself with echoes, people who agree, spaces where his opinions go untested. He feeds on validation, starves from silence. But silence is where the truth waits, not in shouting, not in certainty, but in stillness. And here's the paradox. The more you think you know, the less you actually see, because knowing without questioning is not intelligence. It's inertia. And inertia is the death of evolution. So if you ever find yourself gripping too tightly to what you believe, ask, am I protecting truth or protecting my pride? Because the man who cannot be wrong can never be wise. And in that fear of being wrong, he stops listening. He stops learning. He stops growing. And slowly, he becomes exactly what he fears the most. Irrelevant, stagnant, blind. But wisdom is not about being right. It's about being open, to unlearn, to relearn, to begin again. So take off the mask. Let your certainty crack. Let the unknown in, because the man who is willing to say, "I don't know," is already walking the path of someone who will. There is a man who never looks in the mirror, not because he doesn't have one, but because he's afraid of what he might see. So instead, he looks outward, at the world, at others, at everything but himself. And what he sees are enemies, obstacles, people to blame. Blame becomes his shield, his language, his comfort. It's not his fault. It never is. It's the system, his parents, his boss, the woman who didn't understand him, the friend who betrayed him, the stranger who disrespected him. He casts guilt like shadows, long and heavy, but never on his own path, because to take responsibility would mean admitting that he played a role, that he made choices, that he ignored red flags, hurt others, sabotaged himself. And that truth is too sharp for a man who's still protecting a fragile sense of self. So he builds stories instead. Stories where he is the victim. Stories where he was always right. Stories where growth is impossible because he believes the world is always against him. But these stories are not strength. They are prisons. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And blame is the most absurd, most seductive escape of them all, because it feels like action, like control, like understanding, but it's none of those things. Blame freezes evolution. It locks the psyche in a loop. Repeat the mistake, blame someone else, never learn, start again. It becomes a pattern, a defense mechanism against the unbearable idea that maybe, just maybe, you were responsible for your own suffering. But here's the quiet truth. Taking responsibility doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. Because once you see your part in the pain, you can also see your power in the healing. Blame tells you it's someone else's fault. Responsibility whispers, you have a choice now. And that choice is where wisdom begins. So if you find yourself pointing fingers, ask, what am I avoiding? What truth am I afraid to own? What lesson does this pain carry that I keep running from? Because blame feels safe. But safety without self-awareness is just a cage with soft walls. The man who always blames never becomes. But the man who turns inward, who meets his reflection without flinching, who says, I played a part and I will choose differently now. That man is not just healing. He's becoming whole. There is a storm that doesn't live in the sky. It lives inside the man who never learned to pause. He feels everything, but understands nothing. Anger becomes his language, resentment his armor, fear his engine. And yet he believes he's in control. But he's not. He's reacting, not responding. He is a passenger, not a pilot. He lashes out, pulls back, shuts down, all without knowing why. And when asked what's wrong, he shrugs, because even he can't explain what moves him. The foolish man doesn't study his emotions. He serves them. Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's exactly what happens here. He blames his outbursts on others. He blames his cold silences on the world being too loud. He thinks his moods are truth when they are simply unexamined wounds speaking through him. He confuses expression with power, but yelling is not strength. It is noise. And silence, when weaponized, is not wisdom. It is fear in disguise. There is no discipline in him, only instinct, only habit, only inherited responses from a childhood that never got resolved. So when life gets difficult, he doesn't rise, he erupts. He doesn't think, he breaks. But a man who cannot sit with his own discomfort will always be ruled by the smallest triggers, a delayed text, a harsh tone, a disagreement. They become earthquakes because he has no grounding of his own. He's at war with shadows, fighting ghosts that wear the faces of the people he loves. And in the wreckage, he asks why they leave, why nothing stays, why peace always slips through his hands. The answer is simple. He is not yet a safe place, even for himself. But there is another way. It begins with stillness, with noticing, with breathing through the fire instead of feeding it. It begins when a man says, I feel rage, but I will not become it. I feel fear, but I will not let it speak for me. That is mastery, not in the absence of emotion, but in the ability to hold it without spilling it onto others. The wise man knows his feelings are messengers, not masters. He studies them. He listens, but he does not obey, because he knows a man ruled by emotion is a man who will destroy everything stable around him just to feel in control for a fleeting moment. But the man who learns to stay, to feel, to choose, he becomes the captain of the storm. Not because he silenced it, but because he understood it. And in that understanding, he finds the calm that foolish men spend their whole lives chasing but never reaching. Show me the men he surrounds himself with, and I'll show you exactly who he's becoming, not by force, but by silent permission, because every man lives inside an echo, and the foolish man, the man who fears his own evolution, chooses a circle that never dares to confront him. He calls them friends. But they are mirrors, not of his highest self, but of his comfort zone. They nod when he complains, they laugh when he avoids, they agree when he plays small, and in their presence he feels strong. But it's a fragile kind of strength, the kind built not on truth, but on shared delusion, because none of them will say it. You're wasting your life. You're hiding. You're better than this. That would break the spell. That would shake the silence they've all agreed to keep. So instead they joke, they distract, they normalize failure, they drown ambition in sarcasm and call it bonding. But a man cannot rise in a room built to keep him down. And here's the secret he refuses to face. He chose them, not because they push him, but because they don't. Carl Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But these men, they don't transform, they reinforce. They anchor him to the version of himself that feels easiest to maintain. And so, he stagnates. He stays surrounded by men who fear discipline, mock introspection, and reward each other for staying exactly the same. It feels safe. But safety, without challenge, becomes decay. Because if no one around you demands more from you, you will start to believe there is nothing more to become. And yet, he wonders why he feels stuck, why his relationships don't evolve, why his mind feels dull, his days predictable. The answer is in the echo. Because when everyone around you speaks the same language of avoidance, you start to forget what truth even sounds like. But there is another way. It begins with discomfort. The wise man seeks out those who challenge him, who question his patterns, who tell him the truth, not because it's nice, but because it's necessary. He steps into rooms where he is not the smartest, not the strongest, not the most certain, because he knows that real growth begins where the ego ends. So ask yourself, who do you listen to? Who do you let shape you? Are they reflections of your potential or your fear of rising? The weak man surrounds himself with comfort. The strong man surrounds himself with mirrors that don't flatter but reveal, because only then can he become what he was meant to be. He wakes up late, scrolls for an hour, eats what numbs him, and calls it a good day. He says he's free. No one controls him. No rules, no routines, no demands on his time. But watch closely. He's not free. He's drifting. He fills his hours with distraction, noise, screens, scrolling, quick hits of dopamine that vanish as fast as they come. His days blur together. His nights ache quietly. But he tells himself, this is what freedom feels like. It's not. It's sedation. And he is mistaking sedation for peace. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And this man, he's built a whole life around the avoidance of depth, because discipline would demand that he confront himself, that he ask, what am I building? What am I here for? What will be left of me when I'm gone? But those questions are sharp, and pleasure is soft. So he chooses soft, again and again. He trades his legacy for one more episode, one more drink, one more night, pretending tomorrow will be different. He doesn't realize he is dying slowly by comfort, that his fire, once bright, is now a flicker beneath a blanket of numbness. He calls it relaxation. But his body knows better. It's not rest, it's decay. And here's the truth he refuses to face. Anything that numbs you is not freeing you. It's binding you, because pleasure without purpose is a trap. And the man who chases only what feels good will never build what lasts. A legacy isn't born in ease. It's forged in repetition, in discomfort, in the choice to do what's right when it's hardest to begin. The wise man knows this. He doesn't reject pleasure, but he puts it in its place. He finds joy in growth, not just escape. He finds comfort in discipline, not laziness. He wakes with intention, moves with vision. He's not perfect, but he's present, because he's not chasing the shadow of what feels good. He's becoming the kind of man who feels good to be. So ask yourself, what are you avoiding in the name of freedom? What parts of you are starving while your impulses feast? Because comfort can become a coffin if you never ask what it's costing you. The fool devours the moment and loses the future. The wise man plants today what he'll harvest for the rest of his life. Some men don't learn, not because they're incapable, but because the pain they carry has become familiar. They call it bad luck, they call it fate, but it's not fate, it's repetition. Different faces, same arguments. New jobs, same self-destruction. Fresh opportunities, same excuses. The same cycle in a different disguise. Carl Jung named it clearly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's what he does. He doesn't see the wound. He only sees the world as something broken around him. He says, "This always happens to me." Never, "What am I doing to create it?" The foolish man wears his story like a badge. My father was absent. My ex betrayed me. My life has been hard. And maybe all those things are true, but truth is not an excuse. It's an invitation to break the pattern, to become what your pain never taught you, to make the choice that your past never showed you. But that takes courage, and courage is not loud. It's quiet. It's the moment you stop running from what's inside. The fool won't do that. He'll say, "This is just who I am." And in that sentence, he locks the door to his own transformation. Because deep down, he believes that healing is something that happens to other people. People who had it easier, people who were luckier, people with less to carry. But healing is not passive, it's not found. It's chosen, again and again and again. It's choosing not to text her back, choosing not to explode when triggered, choosing to sit with the ache instead of feeding it. It's the smallest decisions that slowly teach your nervous system a new language. But first, you have to stop blaming the wound for what you've refused to outgrow. The wise man understands, yes, I was shaped by pain, but I don't have to keep living inside it. He rewrites the script by seeing the pattern, naming it, and choosing something different. He still feels the pull, but he doesn't answer the call, because he knows that growth is not the absence of pain. It's the refusal to repeat it without learning. So ask yourself, what keeps repeating in your life? And what would it cost you to finally say, it stops with me? Because patterns aren't fate, they're just unchallenged memory acting itself out. And the moment you become aware of it, you're no longer trapped in the story. You're holding the pen. Some men speak not to connect, but to cover. They talk fast, talk long, talk loud. Not to share truth, but to avoid silence. Because silence is dangerous to the man who fears what lives beneath it. He interrupts, he dominates, he corrects things he barely understands, just to sound certain. And in that noise, he feels powerful. He mistakes his volume for value, his confidence for clarity. But listen closely, and you'll hear the hollowness underneath. It's not strength, it's fear, wearing the mask of certainty. Carl Jung understood this well. Loneliness, he said, does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. And the loud man, the foolish man, is often the loneliest of all, because no one really hears him, not even himself. He uses his voice like a shield. He fills every pause so he doesn't have to feel. He lectures, but never learns. Ask him what he truly believes, and he'll repeat a dozen borrowed opinions. Ask him what he truly feels, and he'll change the subject. Because silence might expose his emptiness, so he never allows it. But silence is where wisdom waits. It's where reflection forms. It's where listening lives. The wise man knows this. He doesn't rush to respond. He absorbs. He watches. He weighs his words because he understands their weight. When he speaks, people lean in, not because he's loud, but because he's rare. His silence gives his voice gravity. The fool never learns this. He wants to be heard more than he wants to understand. He talks to win, not to grow. And in the process, he alienates the very connection his soul is starving for. He becomes noise, a constant hum in a world desperate for depth. But here's the truth. The most powerful men don't speak to be impressive. They speak to be clear. They don't talk over. They invite in. They don't fear silence. They use it because they know that what's said without presence is already forgotten. And what's shared with awareness echoes long after the words have faded. So if your voice fills every moment, if you find yourself needing to be right, to be loud, to be heard, pause and ask, what am I afraid I'll hear if I finally listen? Because wisdom does not raise its voice. It waits, and only the quiet ever truly receive it. Every man stands before a mirror, whether he chooses to look or not. It waits, quiet, unmoving, unforgiving, not because it wants to shame him, but because it will never lie. And that's the problem. The foolish man doesn't want truth. He wants comfort, so he avoids the mirror. He looks everywhere else, at others, at distractions, at endless problems that don't belong to him, anywhere but inward. Because deep down, he knows what he'll see. The choices he keeps repeating, the responsibilities he keeps dodging, the pain he keeps blaming on the world. And seeing that would mean changing. It would mean letting the mask fall, the one he's built from pride, from performance, from pretending he has it all together. So he avoids the mirror and tells himself he's fine, that he's doing his best, that other people are worse, that maybe he just needs more time. But time doesn't heal what you refuse to face. It only deepens the denial. Carl Jung once wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." But the man who avoids his own shadow sees only monsters in others, never in himself. He projects, he judges, he lashes out, because facing himself would mean dismantling the entire identity he's been hiding behind. But there is no growth without confrontation, no transformation without discomfort. The wise man knows this. He still fears the mirror, but he steps toward it anyway. He looks, he flinches, he breathes, and he stays. Not because it's easy, but because he knows the truth he fears is also the doorway to freedom. When he sees the pattern, he breaks it. When he sees the lie, he stops telling it. When he sees the wound, he finally begins to heal. But it all begins with the courage to see himself clearly. So, ask yourself, what truths have you avoided? What part of you have you refused to meet because you were afraid it would hurt? That part is still waiting, not to destroy you, but to liberate you. The mirror never lies, but it also never abandons. It stays unmoving until you're ready. And when you finally face it, you realize something powerful. The man you feared you were is not the man you have to remain. But you cannot become what you refuse to confront. We think of wisdom as something grand, a crown of intellect, a sharp mind, a man who knows the answers before you've even asked. But true wisdom rarely announces itself. It's quiet. It listens more than it speaks. It walks slowly without the need to be seen, because the wise man is not trying to impress you. He's trying to become something deeper than approval allows. And the truth is this: the opposite of stupidity is not brilliance. It's humility and discipline. The fool thinks he knows. The wise man knows he never knows enough. The fool seeks shortcuts. The wise man builds patiently. The fool is loud with opinion. The wise man is quiet with questions. He does not mistake movement for progress. He does not chase recognition. He values structure, routine, rituals of becoming. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege requires work, daily, unseen, uncelebrated work. Not dramatic change, but slow correction. Not perfection, but honesty. The wise man shows up when it's hard, when it's dull, when no one is watching. Because he isn't driven by emotion. He's anchored in commitment. He fails, but he reflects. He feels lost, but he recalibrates. He is not immune to doubt, but he is not ruled by it. Discipline for him is not punishment. It is devotion to who he's becoming, to the life he's shaping, to the future version of himself who will thank him for the sacrifices made today. He's humble enough to ask for help, to admit his flaws, to remain teachable even when others look up to him. And it is this humility that makes him powerful, because the man who still thinks he has something to prove will never be free. But the man who walks the path of inner discipline becomes unshakable, not because life is easier, but because he is anchored from within. So if you're waiting for wisdom to feel like brilliance, you'll miss it. It comes quietly like breath. It looks like rising early, speaking less, learning from the same mistake once. It looks like apologizing first, choosing the hard thing, letting go of the need to be right. The path of the wise is not paved in gold. It's covered in dust, in small decisions, in private choices that shape public destinies. So ask yourself, are you walking it or just admiring it from a distance, hoping life will change without the inner work it demands? Because wisdom doesn't fall from the sky. It is built by hands that are humble enough to learn and strong enough to stay. It doesn't happen all at once. There is no trumpet, no revelation, no grand cinematic turning point, just a pause, a quiet moment when the man you've been no longer feels like the one you want to carry forward. And in that pause, something shifts, not out of shame, but out of clarity, not because someone called you out, but because you can finally hear the part of you that's been whispering beneath all the noise. It says, you're tired. Not just in your body, but in your spirit. Tired of defending what isn't working, tired of blaming what you refuse to change, tired of shrinking when your life is asking you to rise. This is where transformation begins, not in motivation, but in stillness, in the honest, quiet decision to stop repeating, to stop performing, to stop running from the man in the mirror. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But it's also the most liberating, because self-awareness isn't a punishment. It's a path, one that leads not to perfection, but to peace. And peace doesn't come when the world finally understands you. It comes when you finally understand yourself. So if you've heard your reflection in these chapters, not with guilt, but with recognition, then you're already awakening. You've already begun to separate yourself from the versions of you that were built from fear, from ignorance, from survival. Now, you choose something else, not louder, not faster, just truer. You speak less, but what you say holds weight. You chase less, but what you pursue aligns with your purpose. You know less, but you see more. This is not about being brilliant. It's about becoming honest. This is not about rising above others. It's about no longer lying to yourself. So ask gently, where am I still hiding? And what part of me is ready to lead? Because real strength isn't in domination, it's in alignment. And real wisdom doesn't come from proving, it comes from pausing and listening to the quiet awakening within you.